Have you ever heard the voice of your own heart? Because in order to reach your true potential, you have to be able to hear the sound of your own heart slightly louder than you can hear the voices of others. If you had met me when I was 30, you would have seen a hardworking mechanical and biomedical engineer turned MD, finishing her final year in internal medicine residency. Now, don't be too impressed. It just means I'm a really good Indian child. And so I complained to my sister, Rithu. And I said, Rithu, I am hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. I'm exhausted. I don't even think I'm going to make it to graduation. And she said, Neha, what about that winter elective you said is coming up, that whole month you get to plan away from the hospital where you can go anywhere in the world and you can learn about health and medicine? You just need to get a new perspective and you definitely need some rest. What about that self-care retreat that I told you I went to in Australia? 42 days later and 9,557 miles away, I found myself in the land down under with the flying doctors learning how to do Aboriginal medicine. I also booked that week-long self-care and wellness retreat. Day one, the facilitator began. Welcome, everyone. Looks like this week we've got 27 Aussies and 1 American guest. What I'm going to do is I have a stone that I'll be passing around so each of you will know when it's your turn. And I'd like you to introduce yourselves by beginning with the phrase, if I spoke from the heart, I would say. As our international guest, Neha, please begin. My heart racing, my stomach turning as I gaze down at the beautiful translucent rose quartz stone that fit perfectly in the palm of my hand. I had mastered speaking the thoughts of my mind for decades. Speak from the heart? What did that even mean? But the combination of the serene setting, the disarming nature of the question itself, unlocked something profound in me. And unexpected words came tumbling out of my mouth. I guess if I spoke from the heart, I would say, I'm about to become somebody's doctor, except my body's exhausted, my mind is numb, and my heart is heavy. I have spent a decade or more just focused on the next deadline, getting through the next exam, getting the next degree. I actually think my life has been more about taking care of everybody else's expectations and fulfilling their dreams instead of mine. But you know what the truth is? The truth is, I don't really know. I don't have a clue what would make me happy. So maybe that was a little bit easier to do. So despite being halfway around the world, my knee-jerk reaction to speaking from the heart was to expect immediate disapproval. But instead, when I looked around, I saw 27 compassionate souls who were showing their empathy to me through their undivided attention and tears. I think that moment was the first time in my adult life that I recall hearing the sound of my own heart slightly louder than I could hear the voices of others. And all the fear that was in me, the irony is that the person who needed to hear me say those words out loud was me. So that physical and emotional distance from the hospital, from family, from friends, it really gave me the much needed time and space to look within. And what I learned in those moments was that I didn't need to be focused on my next accomplishment, the job I was going to get after graduation. I needed to spend the next week not rushing forward. I needed to look back. So if you met me when I was 4, When I was 4 years old, you would have seen a carefree, curly-haired girl happily playing in the sun. And then you would have heard my grandmother's voice. Neha, come inside, get out of the sun. You're already 3 shades darker than the rest of us. Nobody's gonna marry you if you become kala. The Hindi word for black. I would reluctantly come into the house, run to the bathroom, and unsuccessfully try to scrub the color out of my skin. To make matters worse, my older sister Ritu would point to our family portrait and say, Neha, do you ever, whoops, hold on a minute. We moved way forward. I'm gonna slow down here and move back. My sister Ritu would point to our family portrait and say, Neha, do you ever wonder why all the rest of us have straight hair and you're the only one with curly hair? Fuzzball, you're definitely adopted. At my first grade parent-teacher conference, my mother, we had all proudly drawn self-portraits and pinned them on the wall, taped them on the wall. My mother circled the classroom twice and made her way back to me. Now, Neha, there's no pictures of you here. Did you not do the assignment? Frustrated at my own mother's inability to recognize me, I marched over to my drawing and said, here I am, Mom, as I pointed to a fair-skinned face framed with straight, dark hair. Now, what happened to those pretty curls? She said to me. Mom, I just got out of the shower. It is so common to reject or dislike physical parts of ourselves. What physical attributes do you most common reject in yourself? So already at such a young age, I could hear the voices of my grandmother and my sister louder than I could hear my own heart. And somehow I managed to twist. Oh, I'm not sure what's happening here. Excuse me, technical difficulties.
I'm just going to bring it back.
So should I let you control this?
I'll bring it back.
Okay, right there. Somehow, at such a young age, I had already heard the sound of my grandmother's voice and my sister's voice louder than I could hear my own voice. Thank you. And somehow I had managed to twist curly hair and dark skin, such beautiful attributes, into damaging self-talk. So at the tender age of 7, I had already become uncomfortable in my own skin, certain that I was ugly and unlovable. What do you think? So I didn't just absorb other people's messages about my physical appearance. I also adopted their beliefs. I really just adopted beliefs about my intelligence and my accomplishments as well. Now, my older sister was 18 months elder to me, and just like you would imagine, as a younger sibling, all I wanted to do was tag along with her and mimic her. Well, one of the happiest days of my childhood was when she came home and said, hey, Neha, let's play school. Except everything I say goes, and after school, you need to remember that I'm the teacher and you're the student. Only when I was at full attention, with my legs crossed and my pencil properly held, would Ritu begin her lessons. And every day, she taught me to read, to write, to add and subtract. She shared the secrets that only a first grader was privy to. And it wasn't long before kindergarten became quite boring. Well, playing school with Ritu continued well into the 2nd grade, and one day a letter arrived. It went something like this. Mr. and Mrs. Sangwan, we are pleased to inform you that your daughter Neha has been selected for the academically gifted program. I was so excited that I ran to tell my sister the good news. Except when I approached her bedroom, I overheard her sobbing to my mother. "I hate Neha." Now then I heard my mother's voice. "Now, Rithu, in this household, we don't use the word hate, we use dislike. And by the way, you love your sister Neha. She's the only sister you've got." "That's not fair though. Everyone's gonna think that she is smarter than me because she's going to smart school." Now, Rithu, that's not true either, because you taught Neha everything she knows. The only reason Neha's going to smart school is because of you. As I stood outside the door and I watched through the crack my mom hugging Rithu on her lap, I wondered, could it be true? Could it be true that without my sister's help, I wouldn't have been selected for smart school? So I did the only thing I knew. I ran to my bedroom, I hid under the covers, and I cried myself to sleep. Because I had to bury the secret that somehow I might have cheated my way into smart school. So my time in Australia slowed me down enough for the first time in my life that memories such as these could surface. And when they did, I made incredibly important connections. So as an adult, I often received praise for my academic credentials. But I highly doubt that anyone suspected that at the heart of it all was a little girl trying to prove to the world that she earned that seat in smart school. Now there's really, that's me earning that seat in smart school. Now there's one problem with that argument, and it's that it's nearly impossible to prove something to others that you don't believe yourself. So old habits die hard, and even though I had made such profound realizations in the rainforest, how many of you know knowing and doing are two very different experiences? So as I returned to the US, I once again made the safe choices that would make other people proud of me. If you met me when I was 34, you gotta meet me. I'm 34. If you met me when I was 34, what you would have seen is a dedicated hospitalist physician powering through 36-hour shifts, fueled by sugar, caffeine, and a fear of failure. Now, I had a time, don't worry about me, because I had a time-tested strategy that worked every single time. Here's my secret. Take notes. 2 ice-cold 16-ounce Mountain Dews plus a king-size Snickers bar will get you through 36 hours without sleep. What's your survival strategy? What's the equation that you use when you need to make it through a deadline? Is it 2 a.m. pizza runs? Is it your favorite flavor of Ben & Jerry's? Perhaps Red Bull? You'll know specifically what it takes to make it through that deadline. Now, in the hospital, at my monthly hospital meetings, my medical director's voice was clear. He expected, it was all about metrics, meeting the hospital metrics, efficiency, performance. And if I did those things, that's how I would be voted in as a physician partner. And by the way, it was also how my year-end bonuses were calculated. When I thought I just couldn't do it another day, I heard my parents' voices. My father would say, "Neha, I heard my father's voice. He would say, "Neha, I came out of college and I worked for General Motors until the day I retired. Now is your time to build security and stability. Keep going." I then heard my mother's voice echoing his. "Make sure you get tenured in. for your physician partnership. This is what you've been working your whole life for. And in just 10 more years, you'll have those loans paid off. In those moments, I kept wondering, is this really what I've been working so hard for? And I remembered the weight of that rose quartz stone in my hand. If I spoke from the heart, what would I say? Well, there was no time for that, because every day I saw more than 16 critically ill patients in the hospital, and I had reverted to what I knew. Everything was about taking care of others, meeting their expectations, and saving their lives. So much so that no attention was being paid to my own body. So eventually, the grueling pace, the erratic sleep schedule, and the blatant disregard for my own well-being stopped me in my tracks. June 17th, 2004, I burned out. So you might be wondering, I'm gonna need some help from you. Yep, and there's gonna be a build here. So what is burnout? You might be wondering, yeah, I've heard of it, but what is it really? So burnout, the easiest way, there's lots of clinical and research definitions. I'm gonna give you a way to remember it that I hope is easy. You have chronic stress, and that chronic stress leads you to severe physical and emotional exhaustion. Once you have that exhaustion, I got my manual turning here. Once you have that physical and emotional exhaustion, it then gets worse when you start noticing cynicism in yourself. And this third way that you know that burnout is really at the end stages is when you become ineffective. Now, burnout doesn't happen all of a sudden, right? Although its victims will tell you that it does. It's actually an experience that creeps up on you slowly. Now, let me talk to you a little bit about the stages of burnout, the 3 stages. So the first stage is almost like the alarm phase. It's like you're on a treadmill that's moving slightly too fast. And when that happens, you got this handled. You use some strategies, you step up the pace, and suddenly you are now moving at that pace regularly, and you are in adaptation. So your heart and mind have adapted, and now this accelerated pace is your new normal. Except do that long enough, your body it'll use up all your body's reserves. And when that happens, you will move into the third and final phase, which is exhaustion. So burnout is one of these gradual, continuous processes. And you'll move from one phase to the other almost without noticing. Now, I will never forget the day. I was 5 hours into my hospital shift, and I had only seen 2 of my 18 patients. I turned to the nurse, Nina, and I said, Nina, would you please give the patient in 636 40 milliequivalents of IV potassium? She looked back at me with the whites of her eyes doubling, and she said, Dr. Sangwan, are you okay? Because that's the 4th time you've asked me that same question. I had no recollection. Dumbfounded by her response, I slowly made my way to the hospital bathroom. And as I looked and saw the disheveled, pale face looking back at me in the mirror, I dialed a colleague for help. 30 minutes later, I was in his office, and as we began to speak, clarity emerged. He asked me such a simple question. He said, Neha, have you been acting unusual or doing things or being in ways that just aren't yourself? As I reflected, I thought, oh my gosh, last week on call, a nurse called me to tell me in the middle of the night that a patient had spiked a fever to 102. And I snapped at her and hung up the phone. Had I really gotten angry at a nurse who was doing her job and inadvertently at a patient who needed my help? That was definitely not me. As our conversation wrapped up, he handed me a prescription, he gave me time off, and he told me I needed weekly therapy and coaching sessions. Do you know that you habitually put the needs of others ahead of your own? And when you do that, whose voices are you hearing in those moments? So after 3 months off, spending a lot of time in nature, therapy, coaching, and a lot of reflection, I decided that my life needed to change. I broke off my engagement. I then decided to transfer hospitals so that I could be in a much more collaborative team culture. And what I realized that was probably the biggest epiphany was that my official diagnosis read, stress leave for physician burnout. But my real diagnosis was a classic case of people pleasing. When I returned to work the following year in 2005, I started groundbreaking programs, integrating the physicians, nurses, and staff in courses I called Self-Care in Healthcare. And I then spent the next 4 years practicing on a much deeper level. I listened not only to what my patients were saying, but I heard their emotions underneath and what they valued. And what I learned was that much like myself, their bodies were speaking and their hearts were speaking long before they ended up in the hospital. They just weren't listening. So for a majority of my life, I used my body as a vehicle to transport my head to school, to work, to the hospital, anywhere that I could analyze data and solve problems. I had relinquished so much power to my brain that it had become a little dictator. But once I realized that listening to my body and my heart actually were connected to my physical health and healing, I was able to basically to confront the discrepancy between what I thought I wanted, which was security, status, praise, and approval, to what would actually drop me into feeling joy and purpose in my life. That would be self-care, speaking my truth, and paving this new path for healing in medicine. So every day I'm better at embracing my curls and adoring my skin and really honoring my inner and outer beauty. I now believe wholeheartedly I deserved that seat in smart school. I earned it. What little kid do you know goes around playing school for hours every day after school? And listening to my own heart, what it actually gave me when I turned up the volume is it helped me know when to let go of that tenured physician partnership that I had worked so hard to achieve. Because what that did was open the door to entrepreneurship. So for those of you wondering, does your family know you're telling all these stories? I would say to you, yes, that's the short answer, because they're all here in the audience today. So in fact, what I feel blessed about is that we've been able to have the conversations where we have shared the impact of all these experiences and we're able to learn and grow together. So standing in front of you today is a 48-year-old physician entrepreneur who cares for herself so that she can care for others, who gets her patients off medications, not on them, who is a corporate consultant who helps corporations and healthcare cultures that are toxic turn into healing organizations. So in order to reach your full potential, I challenge you to take the 18-inch journey from your head to your heart. And when other people's voices, your family, your friends, society, start urging you towards your next goal, instead of rushing forward, look back. Slow down, tune in, and turn up the volume of your own heart. Thank goodness I slowed down and was able to hear my own heart, because I no longer meet you in a doctor's office or a hospital when you are shivering in a paper-thin gown at your most desperate hour. Instead, I get to meet you here, and I get the privilege of asking you, if you spoke from the heart, what would you say?